Page number 98 continued. The playwrights began to look for patronage not from the public but from the court and the king. Hence, with the passage of time, the situations of the stage veered away, and the drama that used to be democratic and national became aristocratic and courtly. Conditions and situations of times had changed, and accordingly it became imperative for drama to play the tune of the age. The most striking changes in the form of drama during the Jacobean and Caroline period appeared in the construction and systematic development of plot. The plays were harmoniously welded, and this element is perceptible in Middleton, Fletcher and Messenger. In the domestic dramas of Heywood and Dekker, we have nice specimen of the development of plot on harmonious lines, but with the logical development there was a decadence in many formal beauties of drama. Instead of passion, rhetoric began to be employed in the plays, and the rhetorical devices reached their height in the hands of Messenger and Ford, particularly in the Roman actor and Pity, she is a whore. There appeared generally a lack of spontaneity and imagination in these plays. Lyricism, which marked the historical plays of Shakespeare and the faithful shepherdess of Fletcher, gradually dwindled away in the hands of Middleton, Marston, Chapman and Tournier. Only three of the dramatists of the period, Fletcher, Dekker and Shirley, still kept lyrical flights of imagination and subjectivism. The dialogue of these plays became artificial and unnatural, and it failed to evoke passion in the hearts of readers. The humour which we find in the romantic comedies of Shakespeare appeared conspicuous by its absence. Instead of genial humour, there was a tendency for satirical humour in Ben Jonson and Middleton. The humour scarcely had an appeal to the sentiments. The ending of these dramas was always defective. The early Elizabethan drama was remarkable for its whimsicality and fancifulness, but during this period realism began to appear in the theatre. The writers were interested merely in the depiction of London life, the vices and the evils of society, rather than in making excursions in fairyland and of A Midsummer Night's Dream or As You Like It. Of the realistic writers of the time, the chief was Ben Jonson, Heywood, Dekker, Middleton, Beaumont and Fletcher, and finally Ford. These dramatists tried to portray London life, but they did not glorify London life. There were some who went to town life in order to satirize the vices and evils of society and sneer at the frailties and the weaknesses of mankind. These were the others who were more genial and sympathetic and took a mild view of society and tried to paint life in its tender and brighter aspects. Among those who satirized society are Ben Jonson, Marston, Middleton, Beaumont and Fletcher. Ben Jonson is famous for the satirical comedy, and he boldly enunciated his principle. I'll strip the ragged follies of the time, naked as at their birth, and with a whip of steel print wounding lashes in their iron ribs. He satirized in every man in his humor, the beggary and the poetasters of the age. In Bartholomew Fair, he directed his satire against the Puritans, and in the Poetaster against the vain glorious poets. Marston, in his cynical comedy Malcontent, passed sneering remarks on the world in general, and Middleton, in his Women Beware Women and A Chaste Maid in Cheapside, surpassed the author of The Alchemist in the satiric style. The Night of Burning Pestle attempted to satirize the craze of the people for romantic literature and transcended in its mockery the old wives' tale of Peel. But the saving elements were provided by Dekker and Heywood. Both of them amused the public and systematically pictured London life. Dekker's Shoemaker's Holiday is a masterpiece of sympathetic portrayal of the lowest of London life, and Simon Eyre, the shoemaker who rises to the mayorship, is a remarkable creation. Heywood's The Four Apprentices of London tickled the fancies of the apprentices. These plays are, on the whole, characterized by sympathy and charity, which we do not find in the satirists of the age. One result of the drama being courtly and aristocratic during this time was the overproduction of horror and revenge tragedies. As the audience mainly consisted of the courtiers, something was to be presented on the stage which might thrill their feelings and provide their enjoyment. End of page 98, now page 99. Hence, during this period we notice the tragedy of bloodshed and horror pervaded by a sombre atmosphere, though lighted with flashes of lightning and with nervous energy and force. The chief horror, revenge and blood tragedies of the time are Busy d'Amboise and Revenge of Busy d'Amboise and Revenge of Busy d'Amboise by Chapman, Revenge of Antonio and Antonia and Melida by Marston, The Atheist's Tragedy and The Revenger's Tragedy of Tourneur, The Yorkshire Tragedy by Heywood, The White Devil and The Duchess of Malfi by Webster, The Roman Actor by Messenger, and finally The Cardinal and Traitor by Shirley. It is in all of them we notice blood, horror, murder and hideous scenes. The only tragedy that wins our admiration is The Duchess of Malfi by Webster. Jacobean tragedy more generally reflects the uncertainty of an age overridden by the forces of doubt, confusion and profound pessimism. The Jacobean tragedy writers failed to keep alive the old moral ideals which Shakespeare had upheld and espoused. The Jacobean tragedy writers laid emphasis on human limitation and human defeat. They emphasized, leaving aside Webster, a mood of spiritual despair and moral disintegration in a world of skepticism and doubt. There is the absence of Christian humanism and spiritual certainty in their writings. The writers carried forward the tradition of Marlowe, who had questioned the order and perfection of the universe and the workings of divine providence in all his plays. Like Marlowe, the Jacobean dramatists emphasized a human limitation and frustration. The tragedies of the Jacobean period are pervaded with the spirit of negation and disillusion, despair and spiritual non-confidence. The tragedy of this age is, in short, completely in accord with the spirit of the age and its literature, which reflects spiritual uncertainty in its concern with death, time and mutability. It does not reveal the optimism of Bacon, but is associated rather with the despair of humanity which runs through Raleigh's history of the world, the concern with death and decay, and the corrosion of time, which are constant motifs in the poetry of John Donne and melancholy tone of Sir Thomas Browne's Urn Burial, which has aptly been called the age's great funeral sermon for a world of dissolution. As regards characterization in the plays produced during this time, we note that the characters are mostly artificial and stock types. No interest is evinced by dramatists in the creation of new types of characters. They are more interested in providing striking situations rather than original and individualized characters. The two stock characters are 1. The lustful tyrant, 2. The headstrong monarch. These conventional characters figure again and again till they became monotonous and dull. There is hardly any difference in the King of Maids tragedy and of the King and No King. In Roman actor, women, No King. End of page 99, now page 100. Women with kindness and pity, she is a whore. We find lustful persons groveling in the mire of pornographic passions. The fact is that novelty and depth of characterization had waned away with Shakespeare. Nowhere do we find a noble character like Othello. Nowhere do we see a lady like Desdemona. Only in the Duchess of Malfi does Webster create the Duchess who can be compared with Desdemona. Bassola can serve as a foil to Iago in villainy. Similarly, there was a steep decline in the themes of the dramas produced during this period. Instead of choosing lofty, imaginative and sublime themes, the dramatists ran rather immoral and obscene subjects. The whole atmosphere was surcharged with immorality, and play after play were produced which centered round the theme of immoral love. A Woman Killed with Kindness, The Maid's Tragedy, A King and No King, The Roman Actor were directly based on illegal and illicit love. Not only this, being dissatisfied with natural passions, dramatists like Fletcher and Ford employed incestuous themes. Pity, She is a Whore and A King and No King were thoroughly incestuous and scarcely do any credit to the dramatists of the age. Only Massenger and Dekker tried to maintain the lofty moral love in an age of general corruption, but considering the general trend of the times, their efforts were insignificant. The dramatists also attempted pathos in their dramas, but unlike the supreme pathos of Cordelia's and Lear's death or the pathos of dying Othello, they scarcely appealed to our sensibilities and sentiments. The pathos they attempted to create verged on the border of maudlin, maudlin, maudlin sentimentality. This note is visible in Maid's Tragedy and Women Killed with Kindness. Most of the pathos attempted by Webster, Tournier, Ford and Shirley has an affair of artificiality and external infliction. Thus, on all sides, we feel a gradual decadence in Jacobean and Caroline drama. We do not find again the lofty magnanimity of Shakespeare, and what surprises us most is the way in which the splendid edifice created by Shakespeare crumbles to dust in the hands of his followers. But still the drama of the times gave to the succeeding generations a new stimulus. The tragicomedy of Beaumont and Fletcher and the horror tragedy with its furious declamation gave birth to the Restoration tragedy, particularly the heroic tragedy and the comedy in the hands of Ben Jonson. Middleton and Shirley paved the way for the comedy of intrigue and the comedy of manners during the Restoration period. The contribution of the post-Shakespearean dramatists of the Jacobean period. George Chapman, 1559 to 1634. Chapman is best known to the general reader by the striking tribute of Keats in Chapman's Homer and Swinburne's eulogy of his verse and comedies. Chapman was a true Elizabethan. He had the romantic exaltation of the Elizabethans. He shared their flights and falls, their audacities of style, their moments of nobility and splendor, their long intervals of senseless obscurity. He was not free from magniloquence, impetuosity, and frenzied declamation. Chapman attempted both tragedies and comedies, but his comedies are better than his tragedies. His best known tragedies are Busy Damboa, 1598, Revenge of Busy Damboa, 1608, Caesar and Pompey, the Tragedy of Chabot. Busy Damboa is deliberately shaped as a dramatic symbol of humanity faced with a problem which all mankind must face. In this, we have much of the difference between moral exemplum and the kind of philosophical exploration which is tragedy. It is this range which links Chapman to Shakespeare. In Busy Damboa, Chapman again sets himself to answer in drama the ancient questions of how man endowed by his Creator with reason, strength and knowledge of virtue can live in a world corrupted by evil. But of his question, Chapman can find no answer, and the total impact of his play, conveyed with a striking emotional force, is to affirm that virtue cannot survive, for it must inevitably be corrupted and destroyed by the baseness of the world in which it is forced to live. In a degenerated, decaying world, virtue is incapable of survival. It is busy tragedy reflects the spirit of that pessimism which dominates the Jacobean era. His later tragedies, Caesar and Pompey, and the tragedy of Chabot, reveal his attempts to resolve moral conflicts which figure prominently throughout this period. End of page 100, now page 101. The comedies of Chapman are All Fools and Gentlemen, Usher. The value of these comedies lies in a certain pleasant romanticism rather than in their characters' drawing. His best work is comedy is found in Eastward Ho, written in collaboration with Marston. John Marston, 1575 to 1634. Next to Shakespeare, Marston was the most influential dramatist of his age. His plays opened new visions for succeeding dramatists. His plays reveal the employment of those devices which were later on used with greater artistry by Webster, Tournier, Middleton and Ford. He showed his followers how to end a play in the bloody holocaust of a final mask scene. masque, mask scene. He was the master of dramatic irony, and his tragedies carry forward the revenge tradition set up earlier by Kyd. Marston, the satirist, wrote tragedies characterized by violence and coarseness. He declaimed more rapidly than Marlowe and piled up pedantic, trivial, and mouth-filling words. His chief tragedies are Antonio's and Melodia and Antonio's Revenge. The influence of the Spanish tragedy is perceptible in both these plays. Marston's comedy Malcontent foreshadows Shakespeare's The Tempest. The Malcontent is cynical in tone and expresses that pessimism of Marston. The work is, on the whole, unpleasing, obscure in style, and muddled in construction. Marston's other comedy is The Dutch Courtesan. It bears a close similarity to Dekker's Honest Whore. In spite of the happy ending, there is little of comedy about the plot. In Eastward Ho, Marston joined hands with Ben Jonson and Chapman and produced a fine work resembling the 15th century. Marston's influence was great on his contemporaries. Yet Marston, in spite of his influence on others, wrote no play himself which is truly significant among the tragedies of his age. This is true in spite of the indignant crusading spirit which marks everything he wrote. Marston succeeded only in being moralistic, never in attaining the truly moral vision. This is so because his impulse is essentially satiric rather than tragic. He is concerned with attacking vice by painting it in its most horrible and revolting forms. He is not concerned with the relation of good and evil to one another within the cosmos, or within the relation of human suffering to human joy. He is incapable of that kind of acceptance of the face of evil which is implicit in any total cosmic vision. Behind his plays is always the impulse to destroy evil by revealing how horrible or ludicrous it truly is, and thus his end is not the understanding of the human condition, but rather the improvement of social life by the eradication of vice. In this distinction is much of the difference between tragedy and satire. Thomas Dekker, 1572 to 1632. Dekker took interest in London and presented London life sympathetically. Ben Jonson displayed the vices and oddities of the town life. Beaumont, in The Night of the Burning Pestle, made fun of the unsophisticated ignorance of the citizens and their romantic imagination. But Dekker, with Thomas Heywood, was the only dramatist who sympathetically treated the life of craftsmen and the ragtag and the bobtail of the streets in his Shoemaker's Holiday, An Honest Whore. In Shoemaker's Holiday, Dekker created the famous Eyre, Eyre, the shoemaker, who finally becomes Lord Mayor. This play exhibits the optimism of Dekker. His plays, chiefly comedies, have an attraction quite unusual for the time. They have a sweetness, an arch sentimentality, and an intimate knowledge of common men and things that have led to his being called the Dickens of the stage. His plots are chaotic, and his blank verse, which very frequently gives place to prose, is weak and sprawling. The great fault of his plays is lack of unity and even incoherence of plot. We are very rarely certain that any of his plays were written without help, and they were all probably written in great haste because of the need of money. Perhaps he has received harder treatment from critics because the lack of connection between plot and subplot was one of the most marked vices of the post-Shakespearean dramatists, and Dekker happens to offer the most absurd instances of it. There is unity in Dekker's better plays, but it is the unity of the novel rather than that of the drama. Had he been born in any other age, Dekker would not have written plays but novels. Thomas Heywood, 1575 to 1650. He was the last of the writers of domestic and topical drama. His strength was in the portrayal of people belonging to the middle class section in society. His tenderness and pity brought him closer to Dekker. Lamb called Heywood a sort of prose Shakespeare. He is Shakespearean in many ways. Like Shakespeare, he stressed in prosaic terms a moral viewpoint which is associated with Shakespeare's great plays. Like Shakespeare, Heywood was conservative. End of page 101, now page 102. He believed, like Shakespeare, in the ordered creation of loving God where everything was joined together in a great cosmic harmony. His tragedies, like those of Shakespeare, deal with moral problems and in spite of the working of evil to disrupt the moral order and with the restoration of the moral order. What in Shakespeare emerges, however, as the poet's comprehensive vision of human destiny, conveyed in striking and emotional terms, appears in Heywood in the terms of Elizabethan devotional and homiletic tract. He was a prolific dramatist, but the play by which his name is remembered is A Woman Killed with Kindness. King Kindness is characterized by sympathy. King Kindness is characterized by sympathy, poignant melancholy, and tender grace. He is moral and virtuous and does not admit the triumph of evil. Heywood is important because he may illuminate for us a fact of the moral and intellectual milieu of Jacobean tragedy, of which we can have no awareness while we restrict our vision to the greater artistic achievements of his contemporaries. Heywood is one who doggedly continued to assert the moral values of an earlier age in a new world in which they no longer had great meaning. Conservative like Shakespeare, he continued to espouse throughout his career a view of the universe as the harmonious creation of an ever-loving God, the parts of creation observing order and degree, with every element enjoying its proper function as part of the divine plan. Thomas Middleton, 1570 to 1627. Middleton had strong ties with London, but instead of flattering the citizens, he depicted their follies and foibles. He was thus in line with Ben Jonson, with the difference that he seemed less anxious than Ben Jonson to paint a moral. He had a taste for cynical pictures, though he abstained from brutal obscenity of Marston. He began his career by writing satirical tales of low life in London in the manner of Green and Nash, Greene, Green and Nash, and then turned his genius to the production of farcical comedies such as A Trick to Catch the Old One, A Mad World, My Masters, and A Chaste Maid in Cheapside. In these plays, Middleton showed himself as a close observer and critic of the life of his time.
Done.
Middleton suddenly switched on to tragedy writing and wrote a few good tragedies such as Women Beware Women, representing, like The White Devil, the life of an Italian prostitute. He also joined hands with Hiralal and produced a few more tragedies in which The Changeling is considered the best. The last plays of Middleton include The Witch and The Game at Chess. Middleton had neither Fletcher's poetry nor the artistic scrupulosity of Webster, nor had he the humanity of Heywood and Dekker. The tone of his tragedies, as of his comedies, was generally hard and dry, but in his power to convey the impression of reality, he surpassed all. He remains definitely an original member of the great company of dramatists of his time. Whether we consider his comedies, in which he excelled by this amused observation of contemporary rascality, or by his tragedies, in which he truthfully represented situations of a tense and delicate nature. In the opinion of Albert, he is one of the most equable and literary of the dramatists of the age. He has a decided fanciful turn. He is a close observer and critic of the life of the time, and a dramatist who, on a few occasions, can rise to the heights of greatness. Middleton has perhaps more originality than any other among Shakespeare's successors. He explores new grounds in his plots, and his best situations are entirely his own. It is true that A Trick to Catch the Old One has much resemblance to the Messenger's new way to play old deaths, while his Witch has some links with the Macbeth. On view, however, of the obvious independence of the plays noted above, one is inclined to believe that he gave the hint to Messenger, while the whole evidence points to contamination of Macbeth by Middleton's play, which is thought greatly inferior, quite good in its own totally different way. Francis Beaumont, Beaumont, 1584 to 1616, and John Fletcher, 1579 to 1625. Beaumont and Fletcher collaborated and produced a number of comedies, of which The Night of the Burning Pestle is the most significant. It is a skit on the city craze for chivalric romance. A grocer and his wife come to the theatre to see a play and insist that their favorite apprentice Ralph shall play the hero, to the glory of grocers. He is finally allowed to improve a story of knight entry, Knight, knight errantry, which he loosely attached to the original play. The two plots are dexterously sandwiched, and the result is simply the best burlesque in English language. They also produced two tragedies, The Maid's Tragedy and The King and No King, and comedy Philaster. All these plays show a surprising knowledge of the stage. They mark both the apotheosis of apotheosis of dramatic skill and beginning of the decline. End of page 102, now page 103. Beaumont and Fletcher excelled in comedy, especially in the comedy of London life. They felt the influence of both Shakespeare and Jonson, but their plays were generally superficial. They made a mark in presenting striking incident and stage effect. Their plots sustain interest and are often ingenuous, lively and entertaining. Though rather loosely knit, the characters are numerous and widely varied, but the concentration on incident often makes them shallow. Full of witty dialogue, the plays attain a high level of lucidity and simplicity in their style, but they lack the Shakespearean wealth of imagery. Although the tragedies of Beaumont and Fletcher are concerned with ethical and political problems, and although their work is an intimate reflection of the age which produced it, the kind of tragedy they wrote, of which the Maid's Tragedy is the finest example, is incapable of expressing the kind of moral vision with which we are concerned. Cyril Tourneur, Cyril, Cyril Tourneur, Tourneur, 1575 to 1626. In the work of Tourneur, we have the revival of the revenge tradition in tragedy. He wrote 2 tragedies full of blood and horror. His 2 plays, The Revenger's Tragedy 1660 and The Atheist's Tragedy 1607 to 1611, are melodramatic to the highest degree. In Tourneur's plays, we have all the symbols traditionally associated with medieval asceticism. The human skull, the charnel house, the 7 deadly sins paraded across the stage, the bitter excoriations of lust and gluttony, and a world whose evils are drawn with such brutal exaggeration that they would be merely ludicrous could we not see them in terms of medieval contemptus mundi as the author's way of arguing that a man must place his hopes in the world to come. Of his 2 plays, The Revenger's Tragedy is certainly superior in technique and moral viewpoint to The Atheist's Tragedy. What is really remarkable about these 2 tragedies is the highly moralistic and didactic note with which they are suffused. In these plays, we notice the presence of a highly moralistic and didactic work. The plays are saturated with the crusading missionary tone. They are the work of a moral preacher. Taken together, the Tourneur plays represent a particular attitude towards the moral issues of their age, which render them virtually unique. Tourneur's answer to social corruption and human debasement is in a return to primitive Christianity. Tourneur aimed to bring about social improvement. He had unflinching faith in the essential goodness of man and in the power of love and divine providence to overcome the evils of the present day world. His primary concern is the salvation of the soul as that part of man which can survive and transcend the chaos in this world. His is the heaven-oriented Christianity. John Webster, 1580 to 1625. John Webster was the most significant tragedy writer in Jacobean period, and his 2 tragedies, The White Devil and The Duchess of Malfi, stand out as prominent landmarks in the history of Jacobean tragedy. Both these plays are Italian in tone and temper and were considerably influenced by the revenge tradition which had been popularized in England by Kyd and later on by Marston. These two plays of Webster bear a close similarity to the plays of Tournier, particularly in the use of horrid scenes and shudder-producing instruments. Both in Tournier and Webster, we have the presence of neo-Senecan horror devices, but Webster is very much different from Tournier. Whereas Tournier is explicitly preaching without any reservation the tenet of Orthodox Christianity, Webster does not come out as a deliberate preacher, though he is also inspired by a moral vision. Webster's plays, says Irving Ribner, are an agonized search for moral order in the uncertain and chaotic world of Jacobean skepticism. Webster does not accept without question the postulates of a moral order which had been emphasized by the Elizabethans, but still in Webster's plays there is a moral tone which links him with Shakespeare in the highest range of tragedy. These two Italian tragedies of Webster have been celebrated for their unity of tone and temper, for their realism of characterization in spite of a glaring weakness in psychological motivation, and for the brilliance of their dramatic verse. They have been criticized for their plot construction and gross improbabilities. M.C. Bradbrook, in her book Themes and Conventions of Elizabethan Tragedy, finds in these plays perfection of detail rather than general design. End of page 103, now page 104. Clifford Leach also notices in these two plays a collection of brilliant scenes whose sentences do not ultimately cohere. T.S. Eliot, for that reason, has called Webster in his selected essays a very great literary and dramatic genius directed towards chaos. Webster may not be good at plot construction, but his power of portraying human character is certainly unrivaled in Jacobean tragedy, leaving aside the works of Shakespeare. E. Albert rightly points out the most striking follower of the Senecan revenge tradition. Webster turns from the mere horror of event to the deep and subtle analysis of character. No dramatist, says Collins, even not Shakespeare, showed much consummate ability in heightening the terrible effects, in laying bare the inner mysteries of crime, remorse and pain in his tragedies. Webster had a fine poetic sensibility and imagination of the highest order. His place is certainly high among the Jacobean tragedy writers. It is in his style that the conscious, deliberate character of Webster's art is most immediately obvious. His direction is studiously appropriate, studiously heightened and impassioned. He especially commands the full and the heightened style of Master Chapman, and the influence of Chapman is observable in the elaborateness and the metaphysical character of his metaphors. But it was from Shakespeare that he learned the power of thrilling and the pregnant figure and phrase. Some of his finest touches are directly traceable to King Lear and Antony and Cleopatra, but Webster's style is more elaborate than Shakespeare's. It wants the flowing facility of which the flowing facility of which Johnson complains. Even the most imaginative touches smell a little of the lamp appear to be laid on from without, although with a fine sense of what is appropriate, rather than to spring spontaneously from the heart of the passion. Revenge and horror dramatists of the Jacobean age. Webster has been placed in the group of revenge tragedy writers, and charges of making his tragedies melodramatic have also been levelled against him. It is a fact that Webster suffers from both these charges, since he handles the subject of revenge in two tragedies, in his two, The White Devil and The Duchess of Malfi, besides a number of minor plays written in collaboration with Marston, Dekker and Heywood. He also introduces blood, horror and shudder in his plays, but Webster is not absolutely lost in revenge and blood like the other tragedy writers of his age. He rises above them and shakes hands with Shakespeare in attaining heights of tragedy than could be claimed by his contemporaries. Lightheartedness was impossible to Webster. He had become too deeply subdued to what he worked for. For him, serenity, gravity, morbidity, obsession with death were more than passing moods, but he remains the playwright who most clearly perceived the chaos and conflict in which the tragic thought of his generation was caught, and while unable to climb out of the deep pit of darkness, discerned for a moment through the eyes of his character the stars that shine still. It is pointed out that Webster's great tragedy, The Duchess of Malfi, is a revenge play. No doubt revenge plays a part of its own, but Webster's moral instinct makes him degrade the revenge motive from the original supremacy. In The Duchess of Malfi, revenge is a nominal theme, and it is again twisted so as to show its double aspect. Up to the end of the fourth act, says Hazlitt, the revenge is for an alleged outrage on the insensate pride of family. Combined, it appears as a second thought with avarice. Later, it takes the altogether different turn when the instrument of the atrocities turned to be the avenger of the wrongs which he himself had perpetrated under the pressure of a necessity. Ferdinand and Cardinal take revenge on the Duchess for marrying against their wishes. Bosola, the instrument of the revenge, takes his own Basola, the instrument of the revenge, takes his own revenge on the Cardinal for being ungrateful to him, and incidentally Ferdinand is killed. This is the revenge motive in the play, but it is all slight as compared to the White Devil of the Revengers or the Revenger's tragedy. He makes the revenge not a repugnant, horrible affair, but invests it with a moral tone. The whole of the last act is devoted to the nemesis which falls upon the avengers. Thus, by introducing the tone of moral justice at the end, Webster raises the original theme of revenge to a higher plane. With the exception of Shakespeare's Hamlet, which marks the highest degree of development that the delineation of the revenge motive ever attained. End of page 104, now page 105. What raises Webster above the revenge tragedy writers is the fact that whereas no dramatist of the revenge school succeeds in heightening the terrific effect of laying bare the inner mysteries of crime, remorse and pain, Webster succeeds eminently and he comprehends and reproduces abnormal elements of spiritual anguish in more refined manner than any one of them could do.